When the heavy, gold-leafed doors of the Pierre Hotel ballroom swung open, the room of 500 New York elites fell utterly silent. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes ceased. The string quartet faltered on a high note. Hazel Caldwell, standing near the centerpiece with a 22-year-old supermodel draped over his tuxedoed arm, felt the blood drain entirely from his face. He had spent the last 3 weeks convincing his peers that his wife was terribly ill, bedridden, and utterly incapable of attending the social event of the decade. But there she stood, breathtaking, furious, and radiating the kind of absolute, cold-blooded power that could bring a billionaire to his knees. The lie was over. The reckoning had just begun. The tragedy of Maya Caldwell's marriage did not begin with a screaming match or a shattered wine glass. It began with a slow, creeping silence, the kind that fills the corners of a sprawling Upper East Side penthouse until there is no room left to breathe. Maya was a striking, dark-skinned black woman whose brilliance as a structural engineer had once been the defining force of her life. 10 years ago, she had been the one paying the rent on a cramped, radiator-clanking apartment in Queens. She had been the one staying up until 3 in the morning, redlining blueprints to fund the ambitious, reckless dreams of her white husband, Hazel Caldwell. Back then, Hazel was a junior real estate broker with a cheap suit, a silver tongue, and a desperate hunger to conquer Manhattan. He had looked at Maya as if she hung the moon. He relied on her grounding presence, her relentless work ethic, and her unwavering belief in his potential. But a decade is a long time in New York City. As Hazel clawed his way up to become a senior partner at the prestigious firm Vanguard Holdings, the power dynamic in their marriage violently shifted. The cheap suits were replaced by custom Tom Ford tailoring. The subway rides turned into black car services. And Maya, who had put her own engineering firm on indefinite hold to endure a grueling, high-risk pregnancy with their son, Leo, found herself slowly being pushed into the shadows of Hazel's blinding new life. The physical toll of bringing Leo into the world had been immense. At 34, Maya was healthy, vibrant, and undeniably beautiful. But her body had changed. She carried the soft, permanent curves of a woman who had fought to bring life into the world. She no longer fit into the sample sizes that the other corporate wives starved themselves to maintain. Hazel, newly obsessed with optics, status, and the cutthroat game of appearances, began to look at her differently. The adoring gaze of a husband had morphed into the critical, assessing stare of a brand manager looking at a flawed product. It started with small, insidious comments. "Are you sure you want to wear that dress, Maya? It's a bit loud for the country club." Or, "Maybe you should skip the carbs tonight, honey. I'm just thinking about your health." Maya absorbed the blows silently, chalking it up to Hazel's high-stress environment. She convinced herself that his impatience was merely a byproduct of managing billion-dollar portfolios. But the truth, which she buried deep in the recesses of her mind, was that Hazel was deeply, profoundly ashamed of her. In his new echelon of society, a world of private jets, Hampton estates, and ruthless superficiality, Maya was no longer the brilliant architect who built him. To Hazel, she was a remnant of his humble beginnings, a woman who didn't look like the identical, blonde, size 0 trophy wives that his billionaire clients paraded around. The tipping point arrived in early November, 3 weeks before the Manhattan Crest Foundation Gala. The gala was the crown jewel of the city's real estate and finance society. It was a $10,000 a plate affair held at the Pierre Hotel, a night where handshakes decided the fate of city skylines. For years, Maya had accompanied Hazel to these events, wearing classic, understated gowns, charming his clients with her sharp wit and deep knowledge of urban infrastructure. But this year, Vanguard Holdings was courting a massive merger with a notorious old-money European conglomerate. The optics had to be flawless. On a rainy Tuesday evening, Hazel walked into their kitchen, poured himself a glass of Macallan, and cleared his throat. Maya was at the island, chopping vegetables, wearing a comfortable oversized cashmere sweater and leggings. "Maya, about the Crest Gala on the 24th, Hazel began, his tone artificially casual. He didn't look her in the eye, choosing instead to swirl the amber liquid in his glass. "I was looking at the itinerary. It's going to be an absolute bloodbath of boring corporate speeches, really dry, tedious stuff." Maya paused her knife. "It usually is. But it's important for the Vanguard merger, right? I already pulled my black velvet Carolina Herrera out of storage to have it steamed." Hazel flinched slightly. "Actually, I think you should sit this one out." The kitchen fell dead silent. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Maya turned slowly. "Sit it out?" "Yes," Hazel said, his voice tightening defensively. "You've been so exhausted lately with Leo. You're stressed. You haven't really had the energy for these long nights. I want you to rest. It's a work event, anyway. Mostly just the partners talking shop. It wouldn't be fun for you." Maya stared at him, searching his face for a flicker of the man she had married. She saw only the polished, evasive mask of a corporate shark. She knew it was a lie. Spouses always attended the Crest Gala. It was explicitly designed to showcase the stable, impressive family lives of the executives. "Hazel," she said softly, "are you asking me not to come? Or are you telling me I'm not invited?" "Don't do that, Maya. Don't play the victim," he snapped, the irritation bubbling to the surface. "I'm trying to be considerate of your health. You haven't exactly been yourself since Leo was born. You're not comfortable in those environments anymore. And it shows. I need to be completely focused on this merger, not worrying about whether you're having a good time or feeling self-conscious." The words felt like a physical slap. Feeling self-conscious, he was projecting his own embarrassment onto her. Maya felt a hot prickle of tears behind her eyes, but she swallowed them down. She had too much pride to beg her husband to take her to a dinner party. "Fine," Maya whispered, her voice devoid of emotion. "If that's what you want, Hazel. I'll stay home." Hazel exhaled a heavy sigh of relief, clearly thrilled that he had avoided a massive fight. He walked over, kissed the top of her head, a patronizing, dismissive gesture, and walked out of the kitchen. "You're the best, Maya. Trust me, you're dodging a bullet." As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Maya looked down at the cutting board. Her hands were shaking. She knew her marriage was fracturing, but she had no idea how deeply the rot had set in. She believed Hazel was simply going alone to spare himself the perceived embarrassment of her presence. She had no idea that her seat at the table had already been filled. 2 days later, the truth unraveled with the careless stupidity typical of arrogant men. It was a Thursday afternoon. Hazel was in Chicago for a supposed site inspection. Maya had put 2-year-old Leo down for a nap and decided to organize the mountain of mail and paperwork that had piled up on Hazel's mahogany desk in his home office. She wasn't looking for trouble. She was simply trying to maintain order in their chaotic lives. As she sorted through a stack of bank statements, a thick, cream-colored envelope slipped from the pile and fell to the Persian rug. It was unsealed. Maya bent down to pick it up, and a heavy receipt slid out. The unmistakable black and white logo of Bergdorf Goodman caught her eye. She unfolded the receipt, expecting to see a charge for a new tuxedo shirt, or perhaps a set of cufflinks. Instead, her eyes locked onto the itemized list, and the breath was knocked out of her lungs. Item: Tom Ford. silk charmeuse, cut-out evening gown, emerald green, size 0, price $14,500. Maya stared at the paper until the numbers blurred. A size 0. She was a healthy, beautiful size 10. This was not a misplaced gift meant to surprise her. This was not an aspirational purchase. This was a dress for a very specific, very small woman. A cold numbness spread from her chest down to her fingertips. Her mind raced, desperately trying to construct an innocent explanation. Maybe he was buying it for a client. No. Vanguard Holdings had strict compliance rules against gifts over $500. A relative? Hazel's sister was a size 14 and lived in Ohio. Driven by a sudden, primal surge of adrenaline, Maya moved to Hazel's desktop computer. He had left his personal iCloud synced to the Mac Studio, a rookie mistake born of pure hubris. Maya's hands trembled over the keyboard as she opened his messages. She didn't have to search hard. Pinned to the very top of his message list was a thread with a contact simply named S. Rossi. Maya clicked on it. The screen flooded with images. Photos of a stunning, 22-year-old blonde woman with high cheekbones, pouting lips, and the impossibly thin, curated body of an Instagram model. Maya recognized her vaguely from social media. Sienna Rossi, an influencer who made a living documenting her luxurious, ambiguous lifestyle in Dubai and Manhattan. Maya read the messages. They weren't just romantic. They were transactional, cold, and utterly devastating. Sienna, Tuesday, 9 p.m. Got the dress from Bergdorf today. The emerald makes my eyes pop. Your European clients are going to eat out of the palm of your hand, Ricky. Hazel, Tuesday, 9:05 p.m. They value youth, vitality, and perfection. You're exactly what I need on my arm to close this deal. Plus, you look incredible. Dinner at Le Bernardin tonight to celebrate? Sienna, Tuesday, 9:10 p.m. Obviously. What did you tell the wife? Hazel, Tuesday, 9:15 p.m. Told her she's too tired and stressed to attend. She bought it. She wouldn't fit in with this crowd anyway. She's completely let herself go since the kid. It's tragic, really. I need someone who represents where I'm going, not where I came from. Maya physically recoiled from the screen as if it had burned her. Where I came from. She clamped a hand over her mouth to muffle the choked, agonizing sob that tore from her throat. She sank into Hazel's leather office chair, her knees buckling beneath her. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was erasing her. He was using another woman as a human prop, a shiny new hood ornament to secure a business deal, while actively degrading the mother of his child to a stranger. He was embarrassed of her. After everything she had sacrificed, her career, her body, her youth, her financial stability when they had nothing, he was replacing her for the grandest night of his career with a hired muse, because Maya no longer fit his aesthetic. For an hour, Maya sat in the darkened office, weeping. She grieved for the man she thought she had married. She grieved for the years she had poured into a void. She grieved for the quiet, brilliant girl in Queens who had foolishly believed that love was enough to build an empire. But as the tears dried, something else began to take root in Maya Caldwell's chest. The grief hardened, crystallizing into something sharp, cold, and exceptionally dangerous. The structural engineer within her awoke. She looked at her marriage not as a tragedy, but as a condemned building. Hazel had removed the load-bearing pillars of respect, loyalty, and truth. The structure was going to collapse. The only question left was how controlled the demolition would be. Maya wiped her face, stood up, and looked at her reflection in the dark monitor screen. She was not a victim to be pitied. She was the architect of Hazel Caldwell's entire life. She knew every weakness, every insecurity, and every pressure point in his meticulously curated world. He wanted to put on a show for the elites of Manhattan? Fine. She would give him the performance of a lifetime. Maya had exactly 14 days until the Manhattan Crest Foundation Gala. She did not say a word to Hazel when he returned from Chicago. She greeted him with a practiced, serene smile, accepted his hollow kiss, and listened to him lie about his exhausting meetings. She moved through her daily routines like a phantom, pouring his coffee, packing Leo's diaper bag, and projecting the exact image of the docile, tired housewife Hazel believed her to be. Behind his back, she went to war. Her first call was to Dominic Vance. Wait, she had a friend named Dominic. Just Dominic. Let's call him Dominic Sterling. Dominic and Maya had been inseparable in college. While she went into engineering, Dominic had conquered the fashion world, eventually becoming the global PR director for the House of Givenchy in New York. Dominic knew everyone, saw everything, and wielded social access like a weapon. Maya met Dominic at a discreet, dimly lit booth at the Polo Bar. When she laid out the Bergdorf receipt and printed screenshots of the text messages, Dominic's aristocratic jaw tightened in fury. "I always told you his ambition would rot his soul," Dominic said, sipping his martini, his eyes flashing dangerously. "Taking a rented Instagram model to the Crest Gala to impress the Swedes? It's not just cruel, Maya. It's incredibly tacky. It's nouveau riche garbage." "I don't care about his taste, Dom," Maya said, her voice steady and ice-cold. "I care about the audacity. He thinks he can lock me in a tower while he plays king. I need to be at that gala, and I need to be visible." Dominic leaned forward, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "Darling, you won't just be visible. You will be a solar eclipse. But getting a ticket isn't the issue. I have an entire corporate table for Givenchy. You'll sit with me, directly adjacent to Vanguard Holdings. The real issue is the armor. We need to remind Hazel and the entire room exactly who they are dealing with." The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in covert operations. While Hazel was out networking with Sienna, Maya was in Dominic's private showroom. Dominic called in favors from legendary designers, rejecting rack after rack of beautiful but standard gowns. "No," Dominic would say, tossing aside a stunning Valentino. "That's a dress for a wife. We need a dress for a widow who just inherited the earth." Finally, they found it. It was a custom, archival piece by Alexander McQueen. It wasn't the emerald green of Sienna's dress. It was a deep, liquid obsidian. The gown was a marvel of structural design, fitting for an engineer. It featured a corseted bodice that celebrated Maya's curves rather than hiding them, with a dramatic, sweeping train and sharp, asymmetrical shoulders that looked like armor plating. It was ruthless, elegant, and entirely unapologetic. On the afternoon of the gala, Hazel feigned sympathy as he packed his tuxedo into a garment bag. "I hate leaving you alone tonight, Maya," he lied smoothly, adjusting his watch. "But I have to wine and dine the board. Promise me you'll just order in, take a bath, and get some rest." Maya sat on the edge of the bed in her robe, holding a book she wasn't reading. "Don't worry about me, Hazel. I have a feeling tonight is going to be incredibly entertaining." Hazel chuckled, completely oblivious to the double meaning. "I doubt that. It'll be dull as dishwater. I'll be home late. Don't wait up." He left at 5 p.m. to meet colleagues for pre-drinks, which Maya knew meant picking up Sienna Rossi at her Tribeca loft. The moment the front door clicked shut, Maya's phone buzzed. It was Dominic. "The glam squad is in the lobby. Time to wake up the dead." For the next 3 hours, Maya's master bathroom was transformed into a high-stakes staging ground. A celebrity makeup artist sculpted her features, highlighting her high cheekbones and applying a deep, rich crimson to her lips, a stark contrast to her dark skin and the black gown. A hairstylist swept her natural hair into an intricate, structural updo that commanded authority. When Maya finally stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her bedroom, she genuinely didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. The exhausted, invisible mother was gone. The accommodating, self-sacrificing wife had been burned to ash. Standing in her place was a queen preparing to reclaim her throne. The McQueen gown fit her like a second skin, turning her postpartum curves into a display of absolute, undeniable power. Around her neck, she clasped a vintage diamond choker that Dominic had secured from a vault. It caught the light like crushed ice. "My God!" Dominic breathed from the doorway, genuinely awestruck. "Hazel is going to spontaneously combust." "Let him burn," Maya said softly, picking up her metallic clutch. They descended to the underground garage, where a sleek, black Maybach was waiting. The drive to the Pierre Hotel felt like the longest, shortest journey of her life. As the car glided down Fifth Avenue, watching the city lights blur past, Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were entirely steady. There was no fear left, only the cold, thrilling anticipation of justice. The Maybach pulled up to the red carpet outside the Pierre. Paparazzi flashes exploded like lightning against the night sky. Dominic stepped out first, extending a hand to Maya. When her stiletto hit the pavement, and the obsidian train of the McQueen gown spilled out onto the carpet, a murmur rippled through the press line. They didn't immediately recognize her. They were used to seeing Maya Caldwell in modest background attire, shrinking away from the cameras. Tonight, she stood tall, her chin raised, looking directly into the lenses. Dominic leaned in as they walked up the grand steps. "Showtime, Maya. Let's go ruin a billionaire's night." Maya smiled, a sharp, dangerous curve of red lips. "After you." The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a masterclass in gilded excess. Vaulted ceilings adorned with frescoes soared above massive crystal chandeliers, casting a warm, expensive glow over tables draped in heavy ivory linen. The air was thick with the scent of white orchids and the quiet, pervasive hum of unimaginable wealth. This was the epicenter of Manhattan's financial elite, a room where a single whispered conversation could shift the city's skyline. As Maya and Dominic approached the heavy, gold-leafed double doors, the maître-d'hôtel stepped forward, his eyes widening slightly at the sheer commanding presence of the woman in the obsidian McQueen gown. Dominic merely flashed his Givenchy VIP credentials, and the doors were pulled open. When Maya stepped over the threshold, the room of 500 New York elites fell utterly silent. It wasn't an immediate, cinematic hush, but rather a rolling wave of dropped conversations. The clinking of baccarat crystal champagne flutes ceased table by table. The string quartet, tucked away on a velvet-draped balcony, faltered slightly on a high note before recovering. Heads turned, eyes stared. Hazel Caldwell was standing near the towering floral centerpiece of Table 1, holding court with Henrik Lindström, the notoriously ruthless CEO of the Swedish conglomerate that Vanguard Holdings was desperate to merge with. Draped over Hazel's left arm, looking incredibly out of place despite the $14,500 emerald green Tom Ford gown, was Sienna Rossi. Sienna was busy pouting for a discreet selfie, completely oblivious to the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. Hazel, mid-sentence about commercial zoning laws, glanced up to see what had captured Henrik's attention. Maya watched the exact second her husband's soul left his body. The blood drained entirely from Hazel's face, leaving him looking like a freshly minted wax figure. His jaw went slack. The smug, patrician confidence he had spent a decade cultivating vanished, replaced by a raw, unadulterated terror. He had spent the last 3 weeks convincing Vanguard's partners and Henrik Lindstrom that his wife was terribly ill, bedridden, and incapable of leaving their penthouse. He had painted a picture of a tragic, exhausted woman using her fabricated misery to garner sympathy and position Sienna as a temporary professional escort hired by the firm to help him host. But there Maya stood, breathtaking, furious, radiating the kind of absolute, cold-blooded power that could bring a billionaire to his knees. The dark, architectural lines of her gown made her look like a conquering general entering a surrendered city. "My God," Henrik Lindstrom murmured, his heavy Swedish accent cutting through the quiet. He adjusted his glasses, completely captivated. "Who is that?" Hazel opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Maya didn't march. She glided. Every step was deliberate. A masterclass in pacing, allowing the entire room to take in the fact that Hazel Caldwell's supposedly invalid wife was the most spectacular woman in the zip code. Dominic trailed slightly behind her, a predatory smirk playing on his lips, nodding to various Vogue editors and fashion tycoons who were practically vibrating with gossip. As Maya reached table 1, she stopped directly in front of Hazel. The silence around them was so profound, she could hear the frantic ticking of his Rolex. "Hazel, darling," Maya said. Her voice was pure silk, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, but laced with a lethal undertone. "I felt a sudden burst of energy. I simply couldn't bear to let you face such an exhausting night all alone." Sienna Rossi finally looked up from her phone. Her eyes darted from Maya to Hazel, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing her heavily contoured face. "Ricky? Is this—" "Ricky," Maya repeated, raising a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. She turned her gaze to the 22-year-old. Up close, Sienna looked painfully young, her eyes wide with the realization that she had walked into a trap she didn't possess the intellect to escape. "You must be Sienna. Hazel has told me absolutely nothing about you. But that emerald silk is lovely. Bergdorf, right? I always thought it was a bit tricky to pull off without looking like a Christmas ornament, but you're managing bravely." Sienna flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. She instinctively let go of Hazel's arm. Maya seamlessly dismissed the girl and turned her brilliant, engaging smile entirely on the Swedish billionaire. She extended her hand. "Mr. Lindstrom, Maya Caldwell, Hazel's wife. Please forgive my late arrival. Recovering from a difficult pregnancy has kept me away from the Vanguard functions lately. But when I heard you were in town to discuss the Hudson Yards expansion, I simply had to come." Henrik took her hand, his eyes crinkling in genuine delight. "Mrs. Caldwell, Hazel told us you were deeply unwell. It is a spectacular relief to see he was exaggerating. You look magnificent." "My husband has a habit of underestimating my resilience," Maya said, her eyes flashing briefly to Hazel, who looked as though he might vomit into the nearest ice bucket. "But I wouldn't miss this. As a structural engineer, I've been following the Lindstrom Group's pioneering work with carbon-neutral concrete in Stockholm. It's revolutionary." Henrik's posture immediately changed. The polite, superficial Gala smile vanished, replaced by the sharp, engaged look of a titan who had finally found someone worth talking to. "You are an engineer. Hazel never mentioned this." "Hazel," Maya said sweetly, not breaking eye contact with Henrik, "sometimes forgets that the foundations he sells were built by people like me." The dinner service was an exercise in exquisite psychological torture. Maya had strategically allowed Dominic to guide her to the Givenchy corporate table, which happened to be situated directly adjacent to Vanguard Holdings Table 1. She sat facing Hazel. For the next 2 hours, while waiters in white gloves served butter-poached lobster and truffled risotto, Maya enjoyed her meal with perfect composure, chatting animatedly with a renowned French architect to her left. Hazel, meanwhile, was disintegrating. He barely touched his food. He kept furiously tapping away under the table on his phone. Maya's clutch buzzed relentlessly against her thigh. She ignored it for the first hour, letting the anxiety marinate his nerves. Finally, as the plates were being cleared for dessert, she discreetly slid her phone out. "Hazel, what the hell are you doing here?" "Hazel, you are making a massive scene. Go home." "Hazel, Maya, I swear to God, you are ruining the Lindstrom deal. Sienna is just a PR hire for optics." "Hazel, answer me." Maya read the messages, took a slow, deliberate sip of her Dom Perignon, and locked eyes with him across the 6 feet of carpet that separated their tables. She didn't text back. She simply offered him a chilling, empty smile and turned back to Dominic. At table 1, Sienna was proving to be an unmitigated disaster. Stripped of the superficial safety of a cocktail hour, the dinner required actual conversation. Henrik Lindstrom, a man who valued intellect above all else, was growing visibly agitated by her presence. Every time Henrik tried to discuss geopolitical market shifts or urban infrastructure, Sienna would interject with a comment about her follower count or a celebrity she had seen at a beach club in Mykonos. Hazel kept trying to smoothly pivot the conversation, but the damage was compounding by the minute. As the keynote speeches concluded, the orchestra struck up a soft jazz tempo, signaling the beginning of the networking hour. The room became fluid as guests stood to mingle. Maya saw her opening. Henrik Lindstrom had excused himself from Hazel and was standing near a quiet, draped alcove, looking fiercely bored. Maya glided over, leaving Dominic to fend off the paparazzi who had managed to sneak into the foyer. "Escaping the noise, Mr. Lindstrom?" Maya asked, stepping into the alcove. Henrik sighed, a heavy, exhausted sound. "Your American galas are very flashy, Mrs. Caldwell, but the substance is lacking. I am about to commit $3 billion to Vanguard Holdings for the new Midtown Tower, and I am sitting next to a young woman who just asked me if Sweden is the capital of Switzerland." Maya let out a rich, genuine laugh. "You have my profound apologies on behalf of Manhattan, but if I may speak candidly, Mr. Lindstrom." "Please, candidness is all I want tonight. Vanguard is pitching you the Midtown Tower based on a fully glass-paneled aesthetic, correct? To maximize the skyline views for luxury condos." Henrik narrowed his eyes, suddenly alert. "Yes, Hazel assures me it is the most profitable model." "It is," Maya said, her tone shifting from society wife to absolute professional. "Until the 3rd year. What Hazel's prospectus likely glossed over is the thermal load issue. The specific grid they are zoning for has a unique microclimate tunnel effect off the Hudson. A full glass exterior, without the integration of load-bearing, kinetic shading systems, will spike your HVAC energy consumption by 40% above your projected ESG targets. You'll be bleeding capital to keep the building cool in the summer, completely destroying the Lindstrom Group's commitment to carbon neutrality." Henrik stared at her. He set his drink down on a nearby cocktail table. Why was this not in the risk assessment report? "Because Vanguard is a brokerage firm, Mr. Lindstrom. They sell the dream, they collect the commission, and they leave you to deal with the operational nightmares. If you want this building to be sustainable, you need to demand a redesign utilizing a modular exoskeleton. It will cost more upfront, but it saves your profit margins and your reputation in the long run." Henrik was quiet for a long time. The gears in his head were visibly turning. He looked at Maya, not as a beautiful woman at a party, but as an equal, as an authority. "You are a very dangerous woman, Mrs. Caldwell," Henrik said, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. "I am a mother who was told to sit quietly in the dark," Maya replied, her voice dropping to a low, steely whisper. "I simply decided to turn on the lights." Before Henrik could reply, a hand clamped down on Maya's elbow. The grip was tight, desperate, and bruising. "Maya, a word. Now." It was Hazel. His face was a mask of barely controlled fury, a vein pulsing dangerously at his temple. He had abandoned Sienna completely. Maya calmly looked down at his hand until he, realizing they were still in public, released her. "Excuse me, Mr. Lindstrom. Duty calls." Hazel practically dragged her out of the ballroom, ignoring the curious stares of passing waiters, and pushed her through a set of heavy doors that led to a deserted coat-check hallway. The music from the gala was instantly muffled. "Are you out of your mind?" Hazel hissed, his voice echoing off the marble walls. His eyes were wild, darting around to make sure no one was listening. "What are you doing talking to Henrik? You are humiliating me, Maya. You show up uninvited, looking like that, parading around with Dominic, trying to sabotage the biggest deal of my life." Maya stood perfectly still. She didn't shrink away. She didn't cry. She let him rant, watching the pathetic, crumbling facade of the man she had once loved. "Sienna is a consultant," Hazel stammered, trying to regain his footing, falling back on the lie. "She was hired by the firm to manage European optics. You're being paranoid and hysterical. If you ruin this for me, Maya, I swear." Maya unclasped her metallic clutch. She reached inside and pulled out the folded cream-colored paper. She didn't shout. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stepped forward, invading his space, forcing him to look down at her. She reached into the breast pocket of his pristine Tom Ford tuxedo and slipped the paper inside, tapping it twice. "A $14,500 dress from Bergdorf is a very generous consulting fee, Ricky," Maya said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm, deadpan frequency. "Especially for a woman who thinks you're taking her to Le Bernardin to celebrate her vitality and perfection." Hazel stopped breathing. The color that had returned to his face vanished again. He physically stumbled back, his back hitting the coat-check counter. He realized, in that split second, that he was completely, utterly exposed. "Maya," he choked out, the arrogant bluster evaporating into thin air. "Maya, wait, I can explain." "You have nothing left to explain." Maya cut him off, her eyes cold and empty. "You thought I was too tired, too broken and too invisible to fight back. You thought you could erase me from the life I built for you. But I am not a casualty of your ambition, Hazel. I am the architect of it. And what I build, I can demolish." Maya turned her back on him. As she walked toward the doors, her McQueen train sweeping the marble floor, she paused and looked over her shoulder. "By the way," she said softly, "Henrik Lindstrom is requesting a full structural audit of the Midtown project before he signs a single document. I suggest you tell your partners to prepare for a bloodbath. Have a lovely evening." When Hazel Caldwell stumbled back into the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, the atmosphere had irrevocably shifted. The vibrant, buzzing energy of the networking hour felt foreign to him, muffled by the roaring of his own pulse in his ears. He smoothed the lapels of his tuxedo with trembling, clammy hands, desperately trying to plaster on the confident, patrician smile that had built his career. He scanned the room for Henrik Lindstrom. He needed to do damage control immediately. He needed to frame Maya's outburst as the tragic result of postpartum instability. He needed to save the $3 billion merger. But Henrik was gone. Table 1 was empty, save for Sienna Rossi, who was sitting alone, angrily stabbing a piece of leftover tiramisu with her dessert fork. When she saw Hazel approach, she stood up, her face twisted in a petulant scowl. "Where have you been?" Sienna hissed, keeping her voice low but her tone sharp. "That old Swedish guy completely ignored me after your wife did her little runway walk, and then he just left. His assistant came over, grabbed his coat, and said he was retiring for the evening. People are staring at us, Ricky. My phone is blowing up because some fashion blogger tweeted that Maya Caldwell just wore archival McQueen to outshine a paid escort. Do you know how damaging that is to my brand?" Hazel stared at her. For the first time, the intoxicating illusion of youth and perfection that Sienna provided shattered completely. Looking at her now, complaining about her Instagram brand while his entire professional and personal life stood on the edge of a cliff, he felt nothing but a hollow, sickening wave of disgust, mostly directed at himself. "Get your coat, Sienna," Hazel said, his voice completely devoid of warmth. "The night is over." While Hazel was orchestrating a miserable, silent retreat out the service elevator to avoid the paparazzi, Maya was already blocks away. She sat in the back of the Maybach with Dominic, the adrenaline slowly giving way to a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. But it wasn't the heavy, suffocating fatigue of the past 2 years. It was the satisfying exhaustion of a demolition crew that had just brought down a condemned skyscraper. "You," Dominic said, pouring them both a glass of sparkling water from the car's mini-fridge, "are an absolute menace to society." I have never seen Arthur Pendleton, Vanguard's CEO, look so terrified. And Hazel? Darling, he looked like he swallowed a live grenade. Maya took the glass, leaning her head against the cool leather seat. "He brought it on himself, Dom. He built a house of cards and expected me to live in the basement." "So, what happens tomorrow?" Maya's eyes hardened, staring out at the blurred neon lights of Times Square. "Tomorrow I stop playing defense." When Hazel finally returned to the Upper East Side penthouse at 2 a.m, he found the apartment cloaked in a chilling silence. He called out for Maya, his voice echoing off the high ceilings and the massive imported marble walls. There was no answer. He rushed to the master bedroom. The closets, which usually housed Maya's clothes, were half empty. The safe behind the painting had been left wide open, her jewelry and passport gone. He sprinted to Leo's nursery. The crib was empty. The diaper bags, the favorite stuffed elephant, the meticulously organized rows of baby clothes, vanished. On the kitchen island, sitting perfectly centered under the pendant lights, was a single, heavy envelope. It wasn't the cream-colored stationery of Bergdorf Goodman. It was the stark, watermarked linen paper of Harrington and Roth, the most ruthless, terrifying family law firm in Manhattan. Diane Harrington was famous for leaving billionaire husbands weeping in deposition rooms. Hazel didn't even open it. He collapsed onto one of the velvet bar stools, burying his face in his hands as the reality of his total destruction finally crushed him. The weekend was a blur of frantic, unanswered phone calls and spiraling panic. Maya had moved into a 2-bedroom suite at the Carlisle Hotel, heavily guarded and entirely inaccessible to Hazel. By Monday morning, Hazel's personal nightmare bled into his professional reality. He arrived at Vanguard Holdings' towering glass headquarters in Midtown at 7 a.m., desperate to finalize the Lindstrom paperwork before the board caught wind of the Gala's fallout. But when he stepped off the private elevator onto the executive floor, his key card flashed red. It had been deactivated. A grim-faced security guard escorted him to the primary conference room. Sitting at the long mahogany table was not Henrik Lindstrom, but Arthur Pendleton, the CEO of Vanguard, along with the firm's lead counsel. "Sit down, Hazel," Arthur said. His tone was the auditory equivalent of a firing squad. "Arthur, I know there was a slight misunderstanding at the gala," Hazel started, adopting his best persuasive broker voice. "Shut up," Arthur snapped, slamming a thick leather binder onto the table. "Henrik Lindstrom's legal team called me at 6 o'clock yesterday morning. Sunday morning, Hazel. Do you know what they told me?" Hazel swallowed hard, the collar of his custom shirt suddenly feeling like a noose. "They want a structural audit." "They want a complete suspension of the merger," Arthur corrected, his face purpling with rage. "Henrik informed me that he will not commit $3 billion to a firm that deliberately hides catastrophic thermal load flaws to pad a commission. He also mentioned that the only reason he is not pulling out entirely is because of a conversation he had with a structural engineer." "Your wife?" Arthur leaned forward, his eyes boring into Hazel's soul. "You brought an Instagram model to our most important dinner of the decade and tried to pass her off as a corporate consultant. You lied to the board about Maya's health, and worst of all, you managed to humiliate the man holding a $3 billion check while your estranged wife proved to him that Vanguard's flagship design is a financial death trap." "I can fix this," Hazel pleaded, the desperation leaking into his voice. "Maya is just angry. We are having marital issues. She was lashing out." "She wasn't lashing out, Hazel. She was performing a vivisection on your career," the lead counsel interjected smoothly. "And as of this morning, Vanguard Holdings is placing you on indefinite unpaid leave pending a full internal investigation. We cannot have a senior partner whose personal scandals threaten our international mergers. We need to salvage the Lindstrom deal, and to do that, you need to be out of the picture." Hazel was escorted out of the building, carrying a small cardboard box of his personal effects. The paparazzi, tipped off by an anonymous source, a perfectly manicured Dominic, were waiting outside the revolving doors. Photographs of the disgraced real estate golden boy, looking pale and defeated on the Manhattan sidewalk, hit the tabloids before noon. The divorce proceedings between Maya and Hazel Caldwell did not resemble a legal negotiation. They resembled a meticulously planned, scorched-earth military campaign. Maya's attorney, Diane Harrington, was a terrifying fixture in Manhattan family law, a woman who treated billionaire hubris as a personal affront. During the pivotal deposition in late January, the conference room of Harrington and Roth was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of a brass grandfather clock. Hazel sat across the sprawling mahogany table, his posture defensive, flanked by a frantic attorney who was rapidly realizing he was out of his depth. Hazel had entered the room clinging to the delusion that he held the cards. He was, after all, the primary breadwinner. He assumed he could starve Maya out, offering a meager settlement under the guise of temporary liquidity issues due to his suspension from Vanguard Holdings. Diane let him speak for 10 uninterrupted minutes about his financial burdens. Then she opened a thick, leather-bound dossier. "Mr. Caldwell," Diane began, her voice a smooth, lethal purr. "Let's discuss your liquidity. I have here a subpoenaed ledger from your Vanguard Holdings corporate expense account. Over the past 14 months, you have categorized over $300,000 as international client entertainment. Yet, the line items correspond exclusively to private jet charters to St. Bart's, suite upgrades at the Four Seasons, and luxury retail purchases, including a $14,000 emerald gown from Bergdorf Goodman." Hazel's face lost all color. His attorney stiffened. "My forensic accountant cross-referenced these dates," Diane continued, sliding a stack of photographs across the table. They were the screenshots Maya had taken from his iCloud. "These client meetings were exclusively attended by a 22-year-old Instagram influencer named Sienna Rossi. You were using your firm's money to fund an illicit affair, defrauding your partners to maintain the illusion of immense personal wealth. Hazel swallowed, a dry, clicking sound in the quiet room. That is a misunderstanding of corporate tax codes. It is corporate embezzlement, Diane corrected sharply. And under New York equitable distribution laws, the marital estate has been entirely depleted by your fraudulent dissipation of assets. We are not asking for half, Hazel. We are taking the Upper East Side penthouse, sole primary custody of Leo, with heavily monitored visitation, and a lump sum that will effectively liquidate your remaining stock portfolio. If you fight us, I will personally ensure this dossier is messengered to the SEC and the district attorney before 5 o'clock today. Checkmate. By February, the penthouse was sold to an overseas investor, and Maya purchased a sun-drenched historic brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. It had exposed brick, heavy oak beams, and a sprawling garden for Leo. It was authentic, grounded, and entirely hers. Hazel's dissent, however, was absolute. When Vanguard Holdings' board of directors caught wind of the finalized divorce settlement and the verified expense fraud, his indefinite suspension was converted into a permanent termination with extreme prejudice. He was blacklisted from every major commercial real estate firm in Manhattan. Within weeks, his bank accounts were frozen by creditors. Sienna Rossi, possessing the survival instincts of a shark, recognized that the money had dried up. She packed her collection of gifted Birkin bags, blocked Hazel's number, and boarded a flight to Miami with a cryptocurrency developer. Hazel was left alone in a rented studio apartment in Queens, ironically, just 3 blocks from where Maya had lived when they first met. The true resurrection of Maya's life, however, did not happen in a courtroom. It happened on a brisk, rain-swept Tuesday morning at Le Cuckoo. Maya sat in the private dining room, wearing a tailored slate-grey wool suit, her natural curls styled in an elegant, commanding halo. She was reviewing a series of structural blueprints when Henrik Lindstrom walked in, shaking the rain from his bespoke overcoat. The Vanguard merger officially collapsed yesterday morning, Henrik said without preamble, taking the seat across from her and ordering a black coffee. Arthur Pendleton tried to bring in 3 different engineering firms to retroactively fix the Midtown Tower's design flaws. None of them possessed the holistic understanding of the Hudson microclimate that you do. They were trying to patch a sinking ship with masking tape. I read the updated proposals they filed with the city, Maya replied smoothly, setting her pen down. The entire skeletal structure needs to be reimagined. You can't force a glass box into a wind tunnel and expect it to hold heat. Henrik smiled, his eyes crinkling with profound respect. Which is exactly why the Lindstrom Group officially severed ties with Vanguard. We have purchased the Midtown plot directly from the city's zoning board. We are bypassing the middlemen. We will build the tower ourselves. He paused, sliding a heavy linen paper contract across the table. But I need an architect and an engineer who understands not just the steel and the glass, but the environment it breathes in. I don't just want your blueprints, Maya. I want your name on the door. Maya looked down at the document. The header read, Hayes Lindstrom Structural Engineering. I am funding the launch of your firm, Henrik continued, his voice steady and absolute. You will be the lead structural engineer and principal designer for the Midtown Tower. Full creative control, full financial backing. I trust your mind, Maya. It is the most valuable asset I have encountered in New York. 10 years ago, Maya had sacrificed her own modest engineering firm to build a foundation for a man who eventually grew profoundly ashamed of her. She had poured her brilliance into a void, shrinking herself to make Hazel look taller. Now, a billionaire titan of industry was handing her the tools to build her own empire, recognizing the immense, undeniable power she possessed. She picked up her pen, signing her maiden name with a fluid, unbroken stroke. "Let's change the skyline, Henrik." The next 3 years were a crucible of relentless, exhausting, and deeply fulfilling labor. Maya poured every ounce of her grief, her anger, and her reclaimed joy into the Midtown project. Her brownstone became a sanctuary where blueprints covered the dining room table, and Leo played with wooden blocks on the rug, unwittingly mimicking his mother's architectural genius. She hired a team of brilliant, hungry young engineers, creating a culture of ruthless innovation and absolute respect. Finally, a crisp October evening arrived, marking the grand opening of the Hayes Lindstrom Tower. The building was a marvel of modern engineering, a sleek, soaring monolith featuring a kinetic, modular exoskeleton that physically adapted to the harsh winds of the Hudson River, capturing kinetic energy to power the building's internal climate systems. It was widely hailed as the most innovative, sustainable structure of the 21st century, gracing the covers of Architectural Digest, Wired, and Forbes. The street outside the tower was cordoned off with velvet ropes. Searchlights swept the Manhattan sky, slicing through the autumn chill. A crowd of dignitaries, politicians, and industry leaders milled about the plaza, sipping champagne. Maya stood near the towering glass doors, looking radiant. She had eschewed the dark, vindictive armor of the McQueen gown she wore years ago. Tonight, she wore a custom, stark white silk crepe gown by Schiaparelli, paired with a massive, geometric gold collar that looked like a piece of structural art. She held the hand of her 6-year-old son, Leo, who wore a miniature tuxedo. Dominic Sterling stood to her right, aggressively warding off aggressive paparazzi with a charming but lethal smile. "You did it, darling," Dominic whispered, handing her a glass of champagne. "You actually built a castle out of the rubble." "We built it," Maya corrected gently, clinking her glass against his. As the mayor stepped up to the podium to deliver the opening remarks, Maya's gaze drifted past the barricades, scanning the crowd of onlookers who had gathered on the opposite sidewalk to watch the spectacle. Standing in the shadows of a defunct subway entrance, his collar turned up against the wind, was Hazel Caldwell. He looked 10 years older, his face weathered by the relentless stress of his massive fall from grace. The bespoke Tom Ford suits were gone, replaced by an ill-fitting, off-the-rack trench coat. He was currently working at a mid-tier commercial brokerage in New Jersey, cold-calling local businesses to lease strip malls and warehouse spaces. Hazel watched as Maya took the microphone, the flashbulbs erupting around her like a localized meteor shower. Her voice carried over the crisp night air, echoing off the buildings. She spoke about resilience. She spoke about building things that last, about the necessity of strong foundations, and about never allowing the environment to dictate the integrity of the structure. She looked powerful, beautiful, and entirely unbroken. He realized with a crushing, suffocating weight that brought tears to his eyes the absolute magnitude of his mistake. He had possessed the most valuable, brilliant woman in the world. He had held a diamond in his hands and thrown it into the dirt because he was too foolish to recognize its worth, preferring the cheap, momentary sparkle of shattered glass. As the ceremony concluded and the heavy silk ribbon was cut, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Maya turned to lead her guests into the glowing, magnificent lobby of the tower she had built. Before she stepped through the doors, she glanced across the street one final time, her eyes locked onto Hazel's. Hazel took a half step forward, his mouth opening, a desperate, silent apology forming on his lips. He wanted her to see his regret. He wanted a glimmer of the connection they once shared. But Maya didn't sneer. She didn't look angry or triumphant or vindictive. She looked at him with the polite, brief curiosity of a stranger passing someone on the street. There was no hatred left in her gaze, because hatred required an emotional investment she was no longer willing to make. There was only a quiet, absolute indifference. She broke the eye contact smoothly, turned her back, and walked into the brilliant light of her own empire, leaving Hazel alone in the cold, dark shadows of the city that no longer belonged to him. The story of Maya and Hazel Caldwell serves as a striking testament to the perilous nature of superficial ambition and the devastating consequences of underestimating a foundational partner. When a relationship is built on the sacrifice of one and the vanity of the other, the structure is doomed to eventually collapse under its own hollow weight. Hazel's fatal flaw was not just his infidelity, but his profound arrogance, believing that the woman who built his empire could be quietly discarded to fit a shallow aesthetic. Maya's triumphant reclamation of her power illustrates that true value lies not in temporary societal validation, but in intellect, resilience, and unyielding self-respect. In the end, she didn't just survive the demolition of her life. She salvaged the raw materials, took back the blueprints, and built a breathtaking fortress where there was once only a cage.